Of course, groundwater and aquifers are very, very closely controlled natural resources that are protected by each respective country that has them. It was deemed at the time that the governmental allowance to dig new wells to access the groundwater was appointed on a sectarian basis. Again, further exacerbating the conflict. Millions of illegal wells were drilled between that period and the initiation of the conflict in a military way. You may ask, how can emergency response to an armed conflict have any bearing on the discussion here? And the answer is very clear. Although not the only factor in establishing a massive uprising, movements of populations, 1.5 million internally and 2 million people externally, we must take into account the value of water and its fair distribution among populations. Thank you.
It's interesting you talk about a place where traditionally and basically there are Orthodox Christians, for whatever Christians are left. Tyler, I think, is also going to mention this, and we may not have a chance for discussion, but we'll try.
Good morning. My name's Tyler Edgar. I work with Creation Justice Ministries, and as Father Bender and Deacon Sergey alluded to, we are the new creation of what was the National Council of Churches Eco-Justice Program. We've had the good fortune of working with a number of the Orthodox communities over the years on issue of creation care and environmental stewardship. I want to spend a few minutes just telling you a story, and it's a story out of Alaska. And in fact, it does have to do a great deal with water. So there's some consistency here. About 3 years ago, I discovered a place where Orthodox tradition and cultural traditions, Alaska Native cultural traditions, were being directly threatened by development. And this was the development of a proposed mine called the Pebble Mine. Now, for those of you who might know of Alaska or know of Bristol Bay, the Pebble Mine is actually dictating the narrative of this place today. It is the story of Bristol Bay. Now, I have to tell you that Bristol Bay, Alaska is unlike any other place that I've been to on Earth. If you fly into Anchorage, you'll find sort of the hub of the state, the last great frontier. And then you get on another plane and you take about a 45-minute ride southeast of the city. And as soon as you leave Anchorage, you sort of hug some mountains, you glide over a beautiful wetland and watershed, and you really can see God's hand in and on the earth. The rivers glide like snakes throughout the Bristol Bay watershed. Literally those National Geographic moments, right, where you see the brown bears and the elk and the moose running, all of those things appear as if they have all been there for years, and we know they have. There's no reason that any of you should have been to Bristol Bay. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. But if you are a commercial fisherman or an avid fly fisherman, or you just happen to love getting lost in God's creation, you may have had the good fortune. However, in addition to being home to brown bears and moose and salmon and a few thousand people, this place is also home to a huge deposit of gold and copper. About 12 years ago, 2 multinational mining corporations decided to pool their resources and propose what would be North America's largest open pit gold and copper mine right in the headwaters of what is Bristol Bay, Alaska. some of the proposals that they've shared with the public, and they are few and far between, but some of those proposals have indicated that this mine would span 20 square miles. It would need a 10 square mile wide containment pond for the 10 billion tons of mine waste that it would produce. Those are some big numbers. The easiest way for me to think about them is just to know that the 10 billion tons of mine waste would bury the city of Seattle, and that's the city that I currently call home. The mine itself would also produce and use a number of toxics just to extract the gold and copper. And all of this would happen, as I said, in Bristol Bay. What I haven't mentioned yet is that Bristol Bay is home to the world's largest sockeye salmon fishery. And the about 8,000 people who live there, who call this place home year-round, even in the dead of winter, about 7,500 of them are Alaska Natives, the majority of which are Orthodox Christians. As a result of some of the facts and figures that have come out about the proposed Pebble mine, a number of groups have obviously come out against the mine. And those include commercial fishermen, the lodge owners that head there every summer to host fly fishermen from around the world, the Alaska Natives that I mentioned, chefs, food experts, the native corporations that have been established in Alaska, and the list goes on. The list goes on to also include the Assembly of the Orthodox Diocese of Sitka. They passed a resolution about 3 years ago, and I want to read just a couple of pieces because I think it gets at the heart of this panel, which is putting theology into action. Their resolution stated, whereas according to the traditions and teachings of Alaskan Native people, the earth and the whole creation have always been perceived and experienced as filled with the sacred presence of life. And whereas in the sacred scriptures, our Orthodox Christian tradition, the creation of the world began with the Spirit of God moving on the face of the deep. And whereas in the sacramental and liturgical life of the Church, the great blessing of waters is a normal and regular feature of every baptism. They then went on to say that they would bless all those who would bring economic development to the communities, assuming that they can be and provide successful and continuing operations elsewhere on Earth that would be similar to the mine they'd be putting in at Bristol Bay. Well, there's no other mine like the proposed Pebble mine. No one else had done this. And so with the help of Father Michael Alexa, who some of you might know, as well as Archbishop Benjamin, I came to very quickly understand that this was their way of saying, this is the wrong mine in the wrong place, because we have many communities who live here and who have depended on the beauty and the bounty of the bay for thousands of years. In addition to providing this wonderful resolution out of the diocese, folks from the community have traveled all over the United States telling their story, because this is not a story that you'll read about in most newspapers. This is not making headlines of the New York Times or of the Washington Post, because as I mentioned, it's not easy to get to Bristol Bay. You'll probably get lost along the way, and if you even get close, you might get eaten by a bear. So they've traveled here to DC. They've come to speak with President Obama and his staff and the Environmental Protection Agency. They have conducted annual blessings of the waters, obviously, which they've been doing for years, but have recruited newspapers and televisions to come out and witness this process. There's a wonderful story of Archbishop Benjamin, who lives in San Francisco, being called by Father Michael Alexa, to say, would you please come conduct our blessing of the waters this year? It will take some time. We'll have to be very strategic, but we think we can schedule it so that we can keep the hole in the ice open for you so you can bless the waters. And Archbishop Benjamin just said, hole in the ice? But these have been very important moments for the community, very, very important moments that have shared with folks who are there who otherwise don't leave Bristol Bay that often, that their way of life, their faith, and their traditions are so important to each and every one of us. All of these efforts have been absolutely instrumental in highlighting that the proposed Pebble mine is the wrong mine in the wrong place, and that the bounty of Bristol Bay and the blessings of that place are things that can never be replaced. I've had the good fortune of working with all of these communities. And it is only because of the work of the Orthodox Church. The vast majority of the folks who live around Bristol Bay, as I mentioned, are Orthodox. And it is only because of their continued commitment to the sacredness of this place that more than 80% of the folks who live around Bristol Bay are opposed to the mine. And it is that fact alone that has driven one of the mining companies out of this deal. So the largest mining company that was part of it has now left the process, recognizing that no one in Bristol Bay will be supporting this idea in the near future. So for me, this is a wonderful example of how our faith, our theologies, and these deeply seated beliefs that we have, in fact, are some of the most powerful tools that we have for protecting this beautiful earth we've been given. And it is only because of this tradition that has been found and held in Bristol Bay that we are now able to see protections and continuing traditions in a place where many were fearing that will be lost forever. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes, and thanks to Father Dick and John, that's all we have. Any questions?
Good morning, everyone. I really enjoyed all of the talks that we've had so far. The one thing that I found was most compelling, and Dr. Hagiolis, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, you were right, pictures are very compelling. And what I found most compelling about your presentation is that map where it showed the areas in the world which are most water scarce. And as the speaker who came after you mentioned, Syria is one of those places. But if we were to look at that map again, we would see that the areas of the world where there is a lot of competition and a lot of struggle for water are also the places in the world that we know that our Orthodox communities are most at risk. Number one, Syria is the big one in the news, but we have Egypt, we have East Africa. I mean, even places, there are very fragile Orthodox communities in Pakistan and India, those types of places. And is there a plan in place to kind of educate the lay people, just as Father over here was mentioning earlier about the coffee hour and people just being wasteful and throwing things away? And is there some type of plan in place to take this kind of esoteric knowledge of what's going on in the world and translate it to the lay person level to say, for instance, the third speaker, Ms. Tyler, she was talking about mining. Mining is a very energy-intensive industry. It also uses a whole heck of a lot of water, and the water is fouled up very badly afterwards. But the most water-intensive industry on the planet is the paper industry. And is there some type of way that the church is going about educating the lay folks to say, hey, it's, you know, you throwing away this piece of paper instead of going to recycling it, this ties into water, and this ties into the health and the well-being and the prosperity of our Orthodox brothers and sisters around the world? Is anybody working on that? I mean, I just, for anybody here in the room.
Thanks very much for that question. It's very promising. Can you hear me? No. In fact, there is something going on, and I've just become aware of it very recently. There are people in this room who can speak to it more than I, but the Philoctetes Society, under its national program, has started chapters with environmental committees. And the whole idea is to try and make people much more aware of the environment and the whole issue of sustainability and creation stewardship. And I'm very pleased to say that there are all sorts of programs afoot, running from recycling to actually reducing waste at the outset to reuse. And I think you're going to be hearing more about it. But just personally, I think what we have to do is just be very, very mindful of the impact of our lifestyle. What we do every day has an impact downstream somewhere in the world. Even people who live far from the sea. Up in, somebody was saying he was from Wisconsin. Well, that's part of the watershed of the Gulf of Mexico. And we all know that the Mississippi River drains a huge, huge part of this country. And what we see downstream coming out of the Mississippi River is very sad. So we all have a potential impact. It can be positive or negative if we're very mindful of what we do. I think that's the starting point.
It's interesting from our perspective in non-governmental organizations. Reminds me of an instance several years ago. I was at a conference of emergency response managers of ecumenical faith-based organizations, not just the Orthodox, many others, in Cleveland. It happened to be very, very rainy day, thunderstorm, and the discussion was how can we, as an ecumenical group, promote projects that are better for the environment, that will take up fewer resources. And I kind of piped up, I said, I think it's hypocritical for us to go into developing nations and talk about conservation projects when, all of our organizations use paper to print out things that we only need to keep 7 years anyway, when we have access to simple things like PDFs, just transformation into digital memory. And I, God forgive me, I went on a bit of a tirade about, how we could do a lot more in the headquarters, including recycling in our offices. And just as I finished, a thunderbolt hit right outside the window. And the representative from the Baptist church, he said, wow, when the Orthodox speak, they speak with authority.
I'm good.
Oh, horrors, I hear a little militancy here. This blessing of the waters in Alaska, could that be extended to groundwater and aquifers? Imagine in Pennsylvania dedicating the groundwater to God before a fracking well.
It would be a little bit hard. That would be one problem. You need it. I think
I jumped out of the box.
yeah, but I think, we kind of know the answer. I think everyone agrees with you, so there's no real response from my group. Any other? We have 5 more minutes. Just, yeah.
My name is Sarah Motley. I'm from Virginia.
We got it.
My name is Sarah Motley from Virginia. Pittsylvania County is where my home is. We have a small parish in the Roanoke Valley, but it's an hour and a half from my home. My home is, my parents' home, is 2 miles from Coles Hill. It's the largest unmined uranium deposit in America. And what I'm very grateful for the speakers, and what I would admonish people to do is pray. Because I was a political activist, and I've seen miracles happen, and it was just miracles. But you have to put some footwork behind the miracles. But prayer helps, because uranium mining next to a dairy farm is not a good thing.
I don't know, Tyler, you are aware of the fact that the church in Alaska started blessing water all over the place and saying, now Alaska is all sacred water. That would be prayer.
Yeah, so the blessing of the waters started in Bristol Bay, but has slowly moved. And this coming winter, so it will be January of next year, they are actually planning on an Arctic-wide blessing. So they are working with all of their Orthodox colleagues around the Arctic, so the whole sort of Arctic area will be blessed, as well as the communities that are with them. So it's expanding.
I'm just thinking about some other reactions that have taken place to water cycles, and the Catholics in the Columbia Basin up in your area, looking at trying to deal with some of these things, created a protocol on how to deal with water. And one of the things that it ended up with was a labeling system for wine products. And so, in fact, in that region, you can get a salmon-safe wine that shows that there's no runoff into the streams and that the habitats of the salmon are safe. But it's something that, in fact, came out of church work nearly 15 years ago.
I'm Joelle Novi. I'm with the local Interfaith Power and Light. We work with congregations of all faiths on Going Green. And I just wanted to respond to two of the things I've heard both in the last panel and this one, which I think can benefit from looking to the community of other faith communities in your region. So the question about coffee hour is one where I can guarantee you that people of every faith tradition pretty much struggle with how to be more green and faithful in the way that they do coffee hour, thinking about fair trade coffee, thinking about reusable dishes. So there's a lot to learn from comparing notes with the congregations in your region. Likewise, these beautiful stories we heard about ways that religious communities have been able to take action in a concrete way on local environmental issues. And the question that was asked, I think first, about how do we make the connection between those environmental issues and our personal lifestyles, that is work already being undertaken by diverse religious communities, and you don't have to start from scratch. You can connect up with the Interfaith Power and Light. There are Interfaith Power and Lights in 40 states around the country. You can connect up with those communities in your area and work together across traditions on some of these issues.
I did want to answer real quick, Mr. Coffin. I live in an area that does fracking, and yes, we're going down to the rivers where that water ends up and blessing those waters. It's a difficult situation because of the monetary value to the community, the people living where they drill wells. But their people are actually moving out. The wells aren't becoming, the price of gas has dropped so much that it's not worth drilling anymore. So hopefully that'll happen.
Just one final comment on the coffee. What about bringing your own cup to coffee hour? If you know it's going to happen every Sunday, just bring it along. I'm sure.
Many congregations through that transition, and would love to talk to anyone who wants to think through specifically how do you treat coffee.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you very much for this information. Once again, it's reaching out into the rest of the world, also the parish, also the diocese, the national churches, and the world.